There are some cases that become mysteries. And then there are the rare cases that become wounds, stories so haunting, so unresolved, that a city carries them for generations. For more than 6 decades, Philadelphia had one of those stories. It was not the story of a famous victim, or a powerful family, or a suspect who fled into legend. It was the story of a little boy no one seemed to know. He was found in the winter of 1957, in a quiet section of northeast Philadelphia, discarded in a cardboard box like something meant to be forgotten. He had no name. No one came looking for him. No school called to report him missing. No parent stood before a camera begging for help. No relative knocked on the police department's door saying a child had vanished. Instead, all investigators had was a body, a box, a blanket, and a question that became more disturbing with every passing year: how does a child die like this and leave behind so little trace that the world cannot even say who he was? For decades, the public knew him only by the name the newspapers gave him, the boy in the box. Others called him America's unknown child. Detectives retired. Witnesses died. The neighborhood changed. Entire eras passed. And still, the little boy remains suspended in history, frozen in a single terrible image from 1957. Then, more than 65 years later, science did what time could not. DNA, genealogy, and the stubborn refusal of investigators to let the case disappear finally gave the boy something he should have had all along: a name. Joseph Augustus Zarelli. But naming him did not solve everything. In some ways, it made the mystery even heavier. Because once the unknown child became Joseph, the case stopped being only about a body in a box. It became about a life. A family. A home. A silence so complete that even now, the hardest question remains unanswered. Who killed Joseph Augustus Zarelli, and why did nobody report him missing? On February 25, 1957, a man named Frederick Benonize was in Philadelphia's Fox Chase neighborhood when he stopped his car and went into a brushy area, reportedly after a rabbit. What he found instead was the kind of scene that does not leave a person. Hidden in the undergrowth was a cardboard box once used for a baby bassinet. Inside was the body of a small boy. He was naked. He had been wrapped in a blanket. His body showed clear signs of injury. He was young, very young, estimated at somewhere between 3 and 7 years old at the time. Later, police would determine he was 4. He was not simply abandoned. He had been treated in a way that immediately suggested violence, neglect, and concealment. By the next day, the police investigation was underway. Officers moved quickly. They examined the area, photographed the scene, and processed every detail they could find. The cardboard box mattered. The blanket mattered. Nearby items mattered. Early investigators were dealing with a case that was already deeply unusual, because child homicide cases almost always begin with identity. A parent, a school, a relative, a babysitter, someone notices the absence. But here, police were moving backward. They did not know who the child was, where he had lived, who had cared for him, or how long he had been gone. And yet, even in those earliest hours, one thing was clear: this was not a child who had simply wandered off. According to later reporting and official statements, his body showed signs of severe mistreatment. He appeared malnourished. He had injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. The case was immediately treated as a homicide. But perhaps the most haunting detail of all came afterward. Police took the boy's fingerprints. They circulated information. They issued bulletins. They appealed to the public. And still, no one identified him. Not that day. Not that week. Not that month. The box had hidden him physically. But the silence around him suggested something even more disturbing: that before he was hidden in the woods, he had already been hidden in life. In the days that followed, investigators did what homicide detectives in the 1950s knew best: they worked outward from the physical evidence. The box was traced to a J.C. Penney bassinet product. Public bulletins were printed. The child's description was circulated. The police needed a mother, a father, a neighbor, a teacher, anyone who could say, "I know who that boy is." But nobody did. The image of the child began to spread through Philadelphia and beyond. People were horrified by the cruelty of the case, but also by the emptiness around it. The fact that no one claimed him became its own form of evidence. This was not just a murder. It was a disappearance in reverse. The victim was right there, but the life behind him seemed to have vanished. Investigators noted details that felt deeply personal and painfully small. His body had scars. He appeared to have been recently groomed. His hair looked freshly cut. These details suggested care at some point, or at least handling, close to the time of death. But they did not lead to a name. The public response was intense. Posters and bulletins framed him as America's unknown child, a phrase that made the case feel even larger than Philadelphia. He was no longer simply a local homicide victim. He became a symbol, a child everyone mourned, but no one could identify. This is one reason the case lasted so long in public memory. It did not just feel unsolved. It felt morally unfinished. A city could accept that a killer might hide. But a child with no name? That felt unbearable. And so the years began to pass. The case remained open. The image remained public. The questions remained where they had begun, in the gap between what police could see and what no one would say. As the original investigation aged, certain details stayed at the center of the case. The child had been found in a bassinet box. He had been wrapped in a blanket. He had visible injuries. According to reporting over the years, he also had scars, including marks investigators later described in ways that suggested prior medical intervention or earlier trauma. Those physical details gave the case texture, but not identity. Police also believed the box had likely come from a department store in Upper Darby. That gave detectives an object to chase, but the problem with ordinary consumer items is that they are ordinary. A box sold through retail channels can point to a world of buyers, not one person. It was helpful, but not enough. Some leads came in over the years, and some theories took hold in the public imagination. There were alternative possibilities, rumors, old suspicions, and persons of interest who were discussed in press coverage across the decades. But discussion is not proof, and proof never arrived. That distinction matters for a documentary like this. The case generated many theories, but the official record remained painfully simple: unidentified child, homicide victim, no verified killer. That uncertainty is part of what made the case so corrosive. People kept circling the same facts because the facts themselves were so strong. A child that young. A body left in a box. No missing report. A citywide effort. No answer. Many cold cases fade because there is too little to hold on to. This one survived because there was too much. Every detail was haunting enough to stick, and yet none of it unlocked the central mystery. To investigators, that meant the case could never be fully put away. To the public, it meant the child's anonymity became a second injustice layered on top of the first. The boy in the box was not a case that investigators touched once and forgot. It returned again and again to new generations of detectives, forensic workers, and cold case specialists. Some people spent pieces of their careers trying to do just one thing: give the child his name back. By 1998, advances in forensic science created a new opening. Joseph's body was exhumed in an attempt to recover usable DNA. It was a somber moment for the investigators involved, but also a hopeful one. If traditional detective work had failed, perhaps biology could succeed where memory had not. The exhumation did produce genetic material, but not enough to solve the case in a way that could immediately reveal his identity. The child was then reburied at Ivy Hill Cemetery, where he remained known as America's unknown child. Even that phrase tells you how people had begun to think of him. Not merely unknown to police. Unknown to a nation. Years passed again. But the science did not stand still. In 2016, a forensic facial reconstruction was released through national missing person channels, another effort to push the case forward. Then, in 2019, the body was exhumed again for additional DNA sampling. This time, investigators were working in a changed world, a world where forensic genetic genealogy had already begun transforming old, seemingly impossible cases. That technology would become the turning point. And this is where the story shifts. For decades, the boy in the box case had been a story about failure, failure to identify, failure to connect, failure to speak. But with modern DNA methods, the investigation finally found a way to move not from object to suspect, but from victim to family. It could start where the case had always been broken. The identification of Joseph Augustus Zarelli did not happen overnight, and it did not happen through a single lucky hit. It happened through an exhausting, careful, collaborative process that combined forensic recovery, genealogy, detective work, and patience. Investigators brought in specialists, including forensic genealogists, to help build a genetic map from damaged DNA. According to those involved, the child's DNA was in terrible condition. One forensic scientist described it as being like confetti, broken into small, degraded pieces after decades underground. But degraded does not mean useless. It means difficult. Using modern methods, analysts were able to examine far more points across the DNA than traditional profiling usually allows. They compared those fragments against genealogy databases, searching for distant matches, not a parent, necessarily, but perhaps a cousin, a branch, a family line. This is where the process becomes part science and part human puzzle. Genealogists traced connections across extended family trees, building networks through shared ancestry, marriages, cousins, and second cousins once removed. Piece by piece, they narrowed the possibilities. Eventually, investigators identified the maternal line. Then they found a birth certificate from 1953 for a boy whose parents matched the family trail they had built. From there, they confirmed the paternal side through additional DNA from living relatives. And at last, after more than 65 years, the unknown boy had a legal, historical, human identity. His name was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He had been born on January 13, 1953. That announcement mattered not just because a mystery was solved, but because it changed the emotional weight of the case. A body had become a child again. A symbol had become a person. When Philadelphia police announced Joseph's identity in December 2022, it was the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. Officials confirmed that Joseph had been born in 1953 and was believed to be from West Philadelphia. They also made clear that while his name had finally been recovered, his homicide remained active and unsolved. Police said Joseph's parents were dead, but that he had living relatives, including siblings on both the maternal and paternal sides. Investigators withheld some family information out of respect for those relatives, and because the case was still open. That restraint is important. It shows that even after a breakthrough, the work of an unsolved homicide demands caution. At the press conference, officials said they had suspicions about who might be responsible, but refused to name anyone publicly. They also made a plea that someone in their 70s or 80s, someone who might remember Joseph as a child, a neighbor, or part of a household, would come forward with new information. That appeal carries enormous weight. Because even now, after all the DNA science and all the decades of effort, this case may still depend on memory. Someone may still be alive who knew where Joseph lived, who cared for him, who saw him injured, or who noticed his sudden disappearance and never understood what happened. This is what makes the identification both triumphant and tragic. The mystery of who he was is over. The mystery of what happened to him is not. What do we know now, with certainty? We know the child found in Fox Chase in February 1957 was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. We know he was 4 years old. We know he was from Philadelphia. We know he died from blunt force trauma. We know he appeared malnourished. We know he was wrapped in a blanket and placed inside a cardboard box. We know nobody ever reported him missing. And what do we still not know? We do not know, at least not publicly, who killed him. We do not know why he was hidden the way he was. We do not know the full reality of Joseph's daily life before his death. We do not know whether the silence around him came from fear, neglect, complicity, or something else entirely. We do not know why a child could disappear so completely from the official world that decades later, investigators still had to ask the public if anyone remembered him. That gap between identity and justice is where the case lives now. And in many ways, it is more emotionally difficult than before. Because when he was unknown, people could speak about him in symbols. Now they must speak about Joseph, an actual child with a birthday, a family name, and a place in history. The public can mourn him more fully now. But they can also feel the loss more sharply. Because Joseph was never supposed to become a headline. He was supposed to become a boy who grew up. For years, the child's grave was marked only by the language of loss. He was America's unknown child. It was a phrase meant to honor him, but it also reflected a terrible truth: the world had remembered his death more clearly than his life. After Joseph Augustus Zarelli was identified, that changed. His grave marker was updated. His name was restored to him. In a case built on silence, that matters more than it may seem. A name is not justice. But it is dignity. It is recognition. It is the refusal to let a human being disappear completely. And maybe that is why this case stayed alive for so long. Not because it was merely notorious. But because the public understood, instinctively, that a child had been denied the two most basic things any victim deserves: safety in life, and identity in death. Now Joseph has his name back. But somewhere in the shadows of this case, in old houses, old memories, old family stories, old fear, the rest of the truth may still exist. Perhaps in the mind of someone who is very old now. Perhaps in a detail that once seemed too small to matter. Perhaps in a silence that has lasted longer than anyone ever imagined. If that silence ever breaks, Joseph's story may finally become what it should have been all along: not a mystery, but an answer. Until then, he remains what he was on the day police named him, no longer unknown, but still waiting for justice. Every case we cover takes time, research, and careful fact-checking because these stories deserve to be remembered with dignity. If you want more long-form cold case documentaries like this one, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which detail in Joseph's case stayed with you the longest.